And they had a deal where you could get 5 NES games for 5 days for $5. Do you remember that?
Oh man, that's
like
a deal.
That's like $400 in today's money.
yeah, inflation. Yeah.
Pull out your inflation calculator there.
Yeah. I just calculated it. That's $2 million.
Hello and welcome to the TwinCast pod. We are a podcast where we pick up an old video game, dust it off, turn it around in our hands, and try to ascertain if it holds up today. My name is Clark, and joining us for our esteemed panel today is Cameron. Now, I'm just forming the party here, so I'm only halfway through Cam. He's already got 10 strength, but let's roll for your Riz stat here.
We're Riz.
3 Riz.
Oh, that's pretty low.
And let's roll for your int. All right, 1 int.
That tracks. That tracks.
Yeah, man. I might be too old for this podcast.
Yeah.
So what would I be? Would I be a get about? Is that what I would be?
Yeah, gadabout. Yeah.
Gadabout.
Yeah. T is also joining us as usual. He, in 2017, redefined what it means to be big in Japan. T, welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yes. We actually had a full party of Cody, but unfortunately he fell in battle. So we just have to lug his coffin around with us through this podcast, and he's going to be quite the burden. But we don't have any more magic or Yggdrasil leaves, so that's just the way it's going to be.
Yeah, I used the rest of my magic trying to res him, but it just failed every time.
Yeah.
Now we're just gonna have to overpay to get him resurrected at some chapel.
Such a racket.
Yeah, honestly. Yeah.
All right. Well, if you haven't figured out yet, we are probably talking about. Just thinking through the games that we've done, this game might actually have the most number of fans and the most number of copies of the game sold total than any game that we've done up to this point, and that's Dragon Quest III. Before we kick off that conversation, though, I want to take a moment to let you guys know that we are just a show that's like a games club style show, where every month we pick a game and we play through that game, and then we get together as a panel here and we discuss that old game and if it holds up today. And so next month we are going to be talking about an oldie and goodie, Quake. So if you want to spend some time researching and playing Quake yourself, come prepared to give us some feedback, put some comments in the YouTube, or email us at twincastpod@gmail.com. Well, let's kick off this game that came out in 1988. Trevor, you were only -8 years old, is that right?
Something like that. So I was well into my video game career.
Yeah.
We were only 6, Clark.
Well, yeah, but it didn't come out to the States until 1992.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was pretty
Quite
big gap.
delay.
Yeah, quite the gap, and the Super Nintendo was already out. So just to give you the.
Did you play it when it first came out in the States?
It must have been pretty close to when it came out, and we'll get into this, but I never actually owned it as a kid. We rented a lot of video games, and I rented it over and over from the video store. It's developed by Chunsoft, which is a division of Enix at the time, and Enix still lives on to this day in Square Enix. They were combined as one company. They merged in 2002 or 2003, can't remember. So the directors of this game, a lot of these guys are industry legends, especially in Japan. The director is Koichi Nakamura. The designer and the writer is Yuji Horii. The artist is Akira Toriyama. If you know anything about Japanese manga, he's also very well known for his Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z show and comics. And the composer is Koichi Sagayama. So This originally launched on the Famicom in Japan, came over to the Nintendo Entertainment System, like we said, and a little bit later, 4 years later. But then it's come to a slew of other platforms, from Super Nintendo to Game Boy Color to mobile platforms, and even just a modern remake that came out just last month as of this recording. So the genre of this game is a JRPG. We'll get into it, but this series is often considered sort of the grandfather of all JRPGs. And it has a lot of historical impact, especially in Japan. Not as much here in the United States. So let's kick it off a little bit here. I'd like to start our discussion just by picking your guys' brains and have you give us the history that you have with this series. Not this game specifically, but Dragon Quest. And let's start with the newest comer, T. What has been your experience with this series throughout the years?
I have had zero playtime of this series, but I've known about it for a long time just because it was always part of the twin canon in my mind. I always saw the games lying around, and I always heard you guys talk about Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior. And so, this is the first time that I've been exposed to the actual gameplay. And so I'm very, very fresh with this game.
When I was thinking about this and preparing for this podcast, I was actually just kind of calling back and remembering that one of my memories playing this game, it would have been before you were born, but Cam and I used to watch Kylie all the time as a little child, and she would sit on our laps, and one of the games I specifically remember playing was Dragon Warrior 4, so the sequel to this game, sitting on my lap watching me play that game.
Oh man, so she should spiritually know about these games.
Yeah.
If she were to pick it up, she'd just know what to do.
Yeah.
She would know what menu to go to.
Mm-hmm. Cam, what's your experience with this series?
Well, it all started with Dragon Warrior, the original. Our friend Tim kind of introduced us to those back in the days when you would get a free game when you subscribed to Nintendo Power. And we actually did get our own copy of Dragon Warrior, right?
Eventually, it wasn't right at the outset, but it was one of those games that because it came free with Nintendo Power, there were a ton of copies out there. So we snagged a copy pretty early for fairly cheap.
And I'm pretty positive I beat Dragon Warrior back in the day along with you, but that was as far as like back in the day. This was the only Dragon Warrior that I beat back on the original system back then. And then I remember watching you play 3 and 4, but never 2. I don't think we ever had 2.
No,
so,
Tim had a friend who had 2, and Tim was borrowing it, so I was exposed to 2 that way. But for whatever reason, the place where we would rent games, I don't think they had it available for rent. Yeah. Which is interesting because 3 and 4 were the rare ones.
You guys have mentioned how games would come out free with Nintendo Power in the past. Nintendo Power was the magazine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they would just put like cartridges.
With
the magazine.
I'm pretty sure with Dragon Warrior, it was. I don't know if they did it with any other game. I think Dragon Warrior might have been the only one. It was because it was a huge game in Japan, and Nintendo wanted to make it a big push to make it a thing in the United States. And because it was kind of a later game, they wanted to give a reason to get it out, because they didn't think that just, it would sell off of traditional merits, because this is something that Western audiences hadn't been exposed to. So they wanted to get it out there.
So this was the only game that they ever did that with.
Yeah, and
as far as I know.
Yeah, I would have to look it up, so I don't maybe fact check me on this, but I believe that you would fill out a card. So it didn't like come in the mail with your magazine. I think there was like a card that you filled out and you sent it in, and then they would mail it to you later.
Mail.
Yeah.
Throwback, guys. We're talking about the mail right now.
Yeah. Back in the day where if you got something sent to you through the mail, you'd have to wait like 2 or 3 months for it to get there.
I mean,
unbelievable.
I know. I just played this game and I just had to click install. That's all I had to do.
Yeah. You didn't have to wait 2 months to get it delivered.
You're talking about Temu timeframes right now. You're talking about Shein and Wish timeframes.
Well, getting back to my experience with Dragon Warrior is I always enjoyed the first one. It was awesome. I remember looking and scouring the maps and looking like where Erdrick's armor was and try to figure out where we needed to go next. But I never got into it as much as you, Clark. You were the Dragon Warrior.
Yes,
stan.
I was. Yes, I was the big fan, and I don't know if we need to dive into it too much because we kind of talked about it, but I would go to the store and I would rent them. There was, I don't know if you remember, Cam, but our local store that we would usually rent from was called Top Hat Video.
I was going to say Top Hat Video.
Yeah, and they had a deal where you could get 5 NES games for 5 days for $5. Do you remember that?
Oh man, that's
like,
a deal.
That's like $400 in today's money.
yeah, inflation. Yeah,
pull out your inflation calculator there.
Yeah. I just calculated it. That's $2 million.
Yeah. No,
I see you're pulling out your maps.
Yeah, and just building off of you, I had the same experience that you mentioned too. Like the maps would come with the game sometimes when we would rent it, which was kind of weird. Like, oh, well, the map is here. And I just loved poring over it, like Cameron said. And I want to show you this, T, because you don't really get these with games these days. But this is fragile.
So those who are just listening, Clark's opening up a big old map of the original Dragon Warrior.
You see that? This is the original Dragon Warrior, yeah. Not Dragon Warrior.
Wow. Not
Dragon Warrior 3. And
you're not going to frame that?
Well, maybe I should. On the back is the map again, but what was cool about this is it shows you all of the the bosses, but also the enemies and where they are at on the map too. So, and you can see their stats and like, it was just so cool as a kid to pull this stuff out and pour over it. It was like a literal adventure at the time, and it was it's such a different time with games, right? Because it was like careful and plotting, and I don't know, I guess maybe the analog today is not JRPGs, because JRPGs have kind of morphed into kind of quite a bit different experience, in my opinion. I think the analog today is like a cozy games. Cozy games were kind of on the rise, and that's what it kind of felt like too. Like you were pulling up with this game, you were dedicated to it for a while, and you were pushing through it for an adventure. And I just loved it as a kid. It was something totally different than the action adventure genre that we initially cut our teeth on, or platformers, like things that all required twitch reflexes. This required planning and time, and I was okay with that, and I loved just soaking in the world.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, you don't see maps much anymore. I'm sure that there are guides and stuff that you can get in special editions, but it's not as common. Because I played a few games just when I was younger, and there were maps, and I always loved the same thing. I loved just looking at map. I think Oblivion, Elder Scrolls 4 came with a map, or at least the copy that I had, and I always thought it was so cool. So it doesn't seem to be as common anymore.
Yeah,
it's way better to hold it in your hand than look it up on Google and try to scroll through, because then you don't get a bunch of algorithm mess. Your algorithm doesn't get messed up.
Yeah. Feeding you anime content for the next 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, we should set the stage here and just talk about which versions of the game we played. When we were preparing for this podcast, I basically just told the panel, play whichever version you want. I have a feeling that we all played pretty much the same version, but let's just go around just in case. T, which version or versions did you play?
I played mostly the remake. I did play the SNES version a fair amount, almost to about the same point that I was with the remake, and then I played the NES version for like 10 minutes before I gave up. So,
yep.
Yeah.
Cam?
Almost exclusively played the the 2D HD remake. I did for like a week start a quest on my Analog Pocket where I did the SNES version, but I didn't get very far into that. I think I created my party and that was about it. So yeah. That's I mostly stayed with the remake.
Yep, like Cam and T, I played the remake. I've beaten a lot of versions of this game. So I've beaten the Game Boy Color. I've beaten the Android version. I don't know if I ever actually made it all the way through this SNES version. I know I at least made it probably halfway through at least. So I've played through and beat this game a lot of times and have a lot of experience with it. So
what was the first one that you beat?
It was the NES version back in the day.
Oh, so, man. Oh, look at guys. Look, it's a veteran.
Yeah.
You can see the scars of war.
Yeah, back when it wasn't a big deal to spend hours crawling through a single cave or whatever.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
We're gonna talk about that for sure. And that's one of the things that I want to make sure that we cover too, is because we've kind of well established here that this is a childhood favorite of mine, and that I really enjoyed it as a child. I think there are still a lot of warts on this game. And even with the remake, you can still see those warts of a game that is getting close to 40 years old. So we will talk about them. We'll give it our rating like usual. So let's talk about the basics of this game. T, maybe we can hear this from you. When you push power on the game and boot it up and you play through this game, what is like the gameplay from moment to moment generally going to be like?
I wrote down here in my notes kind of jokingly menu simulator. But it's similar to Pokemon because Pokemon was based on this. So if anybody's ever played Pokemon, they really get the idea of what's going on here. But what you're doing is that you're a group of heroes. You're going out on the world on a quest, and the battle scenes it's menu. It's menu turn-based combat, and in between that, you're collecting equipment. You're buying more equipment, equipping your dudes, and that's kind of the core gameplay is combat. In between combat, you're leveling up your guys with equipment. You're trying to heal them in between combat, and that kind of drives most of the game. So, man, yeah, this is going to be a really interesting discussion because it's like Clark just said, like there are warts on it, but it's also good enough that they deemed it worthy to make a remake, and I understand why. So if it's your cup of tea, like this is the jam, like this is the jam, this is the OG. But if it's not your cup of tea, if you don't like that turn-based menu combat, it's going to be hard for anybody, I think, that isn't used to that to get into it.
Yeah. Just to push a little bit and dig a little bit deeper in the menu simulator thing, that was actually one of the big, innovations that this game brought to the table, is because role-playing games ahead of this, things like Wizardry and things on PCs, they were, how should I say, like they were on a much more powerful platform with a lot more memory. And you had a keyboard that you would type commands generally, and the UI was generally always open. So you would like type in your commands, and you would have like a section of the screen dedicated to your status of your party. You just had a lot more real estate. But when this game came along, one of the things that is like, well, we have to scale this down for some lesser hardware, where we only have a little D-pad, right? We have a D-pad, we have two buttons, the B button, the A button, and then start and select. And that's all we have. So to take something with like a genre of game that was generally thought of to have like a million keys on a keyboard and shrink it down to a controller was pretty revolutionary. And that's why I think that Dragon Quest / Warrior is thought of, one of the biggest reasons why it's thought of as one of the grandfathers of this genre, is because they found an elegant way to do it. And what's kind of nice about it, and you don't really think about it, but the fact that the menus and everything is kind of hidden most of the time while you're walking around the world allows you to see the world more as you're walking around, as it compared to some of the older RPGs where like you wouldn't get as much view of the world because you had all the commands and status menus open there next to it. So
that's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. And I didn't appreciate that aspect. That was really kind of an art that they took that genre and stuffed it into something that small. But for me, that was definitely something that was hard at first to like navigate. Yeah, I mean, just very first thing in the game, I'm like opening up the menu and I'm like, oh man, what am I looking at here? How do I equip this item that's on this other guy to this other guy? And I have to go to this third menu to like equip it. Mm-hmm. And so that's
a little clunky.
It's impressive that they did it, but it doesn't take away from the fact that for me, it was definitely a clunky experience.
Yeah. Hey Cam, I got on and you did a little stream with me, and I watched you play the game, and I noticed that the way that you were playing the game was a lot different than I played it back in the day. It's very similar to the way I played it this time. But I want to, maybe you can kind of dig into that a little bit, some of the changes to the gameplay compared to some of the old ones in the past.
So for specifically the HD remake?
Yeah. I don't know if you mean what I'm asking about, but like there's some things that speed things up in the battle that you were taking advantage of.
Yeah, so you can, in the newest version here, you can set up before you go into battle how you want your tactics to be. You can say, this person, follow my commands. And so that means if you do that with your warrior or whatever, you get to input all the commands. Or you can have an AI, you can set AI to say, okay, focus on healing, or go balls to the wall, or be careful. So what I would do is I would set, when I was leveling in this game, I would just set all my things. I'd set my healer to heal, and then I'd set my other ones to not hold back at all. Just do as much damage as you can. And so the only person I was controlling was basically me, the hero. And so I would go into a battle and I would just click attack, and then everyone else would just do everything. And then so I'd have the speed up all the way for our and so I could just through leveling as fast as I could.
Yeah. It's one of those nice things. Obviously, if you're playing this on the NES, that process probably takes conservatively maybe 5 times as long, maybe even more.
So one thing I do want to point out, though, is like the original on NES and stuff like that. If you were playing this back in our day, you could tell your mom and dad while you were playing this game that I'm not just playing a video game, I'm reading, because there's a lot of reading. Well, look at all these words on the screen right here. Well, I know what a wyvern is. So
yeah. Honestly, like every once in a while, there'll be like some random word that I know, and I can't think of an example right now, but like my wife will ask me like, what does this mean? And I'll know it from either video game like this, or another one would be like Magic the Gathering. Like, cause there's a lot of corner case.
Like senpai or something like that.
Yep. And honestly, I think that this game was probably the most reading I'd ever done by the time I got to this game. So I think your point there is well taken. Yep.
Although with this new version, the addition of voice acting was pretty welcome too.
Yeah, and maybe we'll talk about some of that coming up, I think. That was definitely a welcome addition. T, let's dig a little bit more in on some of the pain points. You mentioned some of the menus being clunky. What were some of the other like warts around the gameplay that you had trouble with?
It does depend on the version. For the SNES version, obviously and this was just kind of how games were back then, but you weren't really sure if you were going the right way. So I've started playing this game and I got to I got to the tower like at the very beginning, and the tower is just a huge grind, right? Like you're going, 3-4 floors, whatever it is, to the top of the tower, and it's
To get the magic key. Yeah.
right, and it's supposed to be a grind, and I just kind of kept getting leveled, by some of the monsters in there, and I was not confident that I was doing the right thing, so I turned to a guide at that point. So that's something that is a welcome change in the remake. But I guess I'll just touch on what Cam just said and what you guys were mentioning. Like in the remake, you can automate the combat. So like the core like gameplay mechanic of this game was like the combat. Like you're in combat and you're selecting, and there's some strategy there. And in the remake, you can automate that. So you can like almost not play the remake. You're traveling in the overworld, of course, and you're talking to people to get the next thing. But when I booted up the remake after playing the SNES version, because I wanted to play the original before I played the remake, I was like, whoa, like what is this game? Like I'm not even like playing it right now.
It changes it quite a bit.
It does.
Well, a point to that though is it later on in the game it gets harder to do that. Actually, the enemies become much harder later in the game, and you have to use like specialized spells and stuff like that in order to just survive. But early in the game, it is much easier.
This is probably a good time to talk about, dig a little bit more into this a little bit, like the limits of that system and advantages of that system too. Cam, I don't know if you were kind of the same way, but I would usually put those automatic things on when I was grinding, and then I would put a podcast on and not think too much about it and then just level up, which I thought was actually kind of fun. I enjoyed doing that. But then usually when I was like making a push to get to a boss and I needed to conserve MP or whatever, be a little more strategic, I would take it off. And then I would put in my commands as I made my way to the boss and then fought the boss. Did you guys have a similar play pattern?
For me, I didn't know what the tempo of this game was, and then again, difference between the versions. So the SNES version, like I came into the game and I was like, oh, this game is just going to be like hard. Like that was my first impression. I was like, this is going to be a difficult game, and I'm really going to have to just do some of that grinding. And then in the remake, I was immediately struck by how easy it was.
They balanced it quite a bit different in the remake. They made it a lot easier at the front, but the difficulty does scale up quite a bit in the remake.
Right. So, and so I blew through that first part. I get to the open, the big world, and I'm just like, that's when I started getting leveled in the new game. Is that like I hadn't leveled up basically at all in the early part of the game because I didn't need to. But then, so there was. Yeah, there's kind of very unforgiving at different points for different reasons, for both versions.
Yeah. Just one more note on the auto battle features or the strategy features that you can use in this game is it's actually there's some benefits to using it that you can't do if you're inputting the commands. And one of the things, like an example might be if early after you put in your commands and then the fighting starts, if one of your players die, then you have to wait till next round to input a command to revive that character, right? But if you have the auto commands in, then the AI is smart enough to like just do that right during the battle, like right during the not having to input another command. So your player dies, then it's now your healer's turn, and your healer turn will automatically res him right there, and not have to wait a turn cycle to get him resurrected.
That's a good point, Clark. In fact, I found even on the tougher battles, when I would take off fully automatic thing, I would actually leave it on my healer. My priest would stay fully automatic for that same reason that you're talking about, so I can get heals more timely. Because a lot of the times you'll start the round of the battle and like one guy will take a huge chunk of damage. And if you were inputting it yourself, you may have been trying to attack with your healer that turn or whatever. But now the automatic, the AI will just heal that guy for you, and
Yeah.
you don't have to change it. And so it was so much nicer to have that, even in the hard battles. So
Yeah.
And I think that kind of brings up probably one of my biggest complaints about the game is that even at its best, like that type of system for me doesn't feel very interactive. And like some of the most frustrating moments of this game were when like I would roll into a battle and that like there would be 4 enemies, right? And they would just all take turns wailing on you before you even got the first time to go. And then you get to go, and even if you're trying to be strategic about your menu picks, like there's only so much that you can do after you've been wailed on by 4 enemies. And then of course, you know, you can adjust stats to try to go earlier. But yeah, those moments were so frustrating for me, and I probably got more frustrated in this game than I have most other games that we've played just because of that. Like there's this feeling that like I should be able to do something here, that I should be able to interact with this moment better, but I'm unable to. Like there's a crabbid that's like summoning crabbids over and over and over again, and there's like nothing I can do about it because the crabbids keep taking their turn to attack. And anyway, so moments like that, like I found more frustrating than most games that we've played up to this point.
Yeah, and this is really like, this is one of the things that design has modernized and is different than today. It like this game, it doesn't like hold your hand at all. Like you can, especially when you get into the more open parts of this game, you can just kind of wander wherever you go, and you could wander to a place where the mobs are way stronger than you, and it's kind of a soft gate. Like it's not going to explicitly tell you can't go here, but when you get in battle, you'll know that you can't go there because you're not going to be able to fight those enemies. And I remember that as a kid, like being so afraid to go into a dungeon because I didn't know if I was strong enough. And to me, that was some of the charm back then. It's like, okay, well, I'm gearing up. Okay, am I going to be strong enough to go in this cave? Go in this cave, get wiped out. I'm like, okay, I guess I need to go do something else for a little bit. But design is just totally different today. In fact, even in this game, there's generally just like there's like little circles on the map that says, okay, this is the next place to go. Like, so it changes it quite a bit. Like the whole experience of this game is totally different when you have a little circle on the map. Generally, you found out as a kid where to go next one of 2 ways. I guess maybe 3 ways. The hard way was to just really pay attention to what all the NPCs were telling you, and they would generally give you enough clues to let you know kind of where to go next. Another way is just have a friend, or what we called recess banter, where you talk with your friends, and then Tim tells you, oh, you actually need to do XYZ at this part. I'm like, okay, I'm going to go home and try that when I get back from school. And then you kind of discover things that way. The third way is you had Nintendo Power and you looked it up in Nintendo Power and like, okay, this is what I need to do. That's all streamlined in this, and so you're kind of missing that element. But to be honest, all 3 of us, I think, are patient enough to like go about it the hard way. We're either gonna look it up on a guide, or if it gives it to us in the game, all the better. And so let's go.
I was going to say, well, even with this game pointing you where to go, sometimes you'll go to that place and you still don't know what to do. So you have to do a little more poking around. I made a point not to use any guides here. And I guess we haven't really talked about this part of the game yet too, but there's a day-night cycle in this game. It changes from night to day. So there are some parts in the game where it tells you to go somewhere, but you can only accomplish the goal at a certain time of day. And if you go there, you'll see that, oh, well, this guy's just a skeleton. He's not here anymore. But what you really needed to go there at night and have the key so you can get in there and talk to his ghost and stuff like that.
Actually, that was really revolutionary at the time, and other RPGs have copied it since. But I remember being blown away that there was a day-night cycle, and like you said, context changes. Like when you go into town, a lot of times NPCs will explicitly tell you, "Come talk to my dad at night" or whatever, and so that's your clue. Like, okay, well, I guess I need to come back at night. In the old game, you would just have to go outside and circle the town until it got to be nighttime. In this game, you could go to the inn. I don't know if you guys saw this, and you can ask him to stay at the inn until a certain time of day.
Yeah, and it is interesting. It does change the psychology when you start to have things handed to you, and it's when you like in the new game when you start to see the circle on the map, you really. I found myself a lot more impatient with something that was a lot less intuitive in the older game, but that I was more patient with because I just knew it wasn't coming. But in the new game, or I should say the new version, right? Like when you start to get those carrots more often, you start to want more hints, more help. Like I don't want to grind through this thing. I just want to know where to go next. And I felt completely different playing those versions for that reason. I think just knowing that the old game, help was not coming, right? Like I was just gonna have to do it.
Yeah. Well, I don't think we've even cracked the biggest nut of this game yet. What kind of made this famous and was like the biggest evolution that this game did, and that's the party system. So let's talk about the party system because this is where it was really revolutionary at the time. Let's kick off this conversation. Let's just talk about the party that we took into battle as we were preparing for this podcast. T, let's start with you. Who did you have in your party?
Let's see. So for the SNES and the new version, I did a warrior, a healer, and then I did the thief. Okay. Is what I did for those two. And then in the NES version, I booted that up. I accidentally did a warrior, a mage, not a healer, and then the goof off, or whatever it was translated as in the NES version.
I think it was goof off. I think is what it called it. I have to look, but yeah.
So to be fair to the NES version, I was not giving it a good shot at that point, and I recognize that, but I didn't play for very long. So my party, I think, was probably pretty standard fare. I imagine for most people booting up this game for the first time.
Mm-hmm. I think Cam and I had the same configuration. So why don't you go through what we did, Cam?
Oh, I just did warrior, priest, and beastmaster because I wanted to do the beastmaster because it was a new class for the remake. So
yeah, and I was
twins.
Yep, that's
twins.
Well, that's independently. we made our classes, our team, and then we coordinated and we actually did the exact same.
Yeah, there have been scientific studies that they actually have a bond through their minds over space and time.
Yep.
Everybody listening.
Yep. Cam, what am I thinking about right now?
You're thinking about how you wish you would have made your Beastmaster female.
Exactly.
Because you wanted a female Beastmaster.
Uncanny. Absolutely uncanny.
How did you know, Cam?
That's okay. I accidentally made my main character female because I just liked the sprite better.
Yeah.
That's why everyone called me she throughout the whole game.
Yeah.
So let's dig into this system because, like I said, it's kind of taken for granted now, but this game at launch and the subsequent remakes really flesh out the job system. And I think it's one of the biggest reasons to look at this game, I think, is this job system. And the job system in conjunction with a few other systems that came alongside it at launch, but also that they've added into later remakes as well. So let's actually, what in your mind are the advantages and disadvantages of the class system or job system here in this game?
I think it's well done. Like I said, I didn't really get too crazy with my party system, and I didn't do a subsequent playthrough to really shake it up besides the NES version that I won't talk about. And so I think it's well done because every person in my party felt important, right? Like I needed the heavy hitter warrior. I needed the healer. I obviously needed the healer. The thief, I don't think I got the thief's strategy down very, very good, but I really like that aspect. I didn't have any complaints about the class system, and I was really impressed that in all of these versions, including the NES version, you get to create your own party. The NES version was a little bit dumbed down. I remember. I don't remember exactly why, but it was cool that you got to select, create new people. You got to choose their stats. Right, it wasn't just given to you. That was really cool, and I was really impressed that all of these versions had that to some extent. And I really liked that. I thought that.
And
was really cool.
you get to name them, which adds like a huge personalized version. I should actually ask you guys, what did you guys do for names? Did you just do some random names? Did you do family names? What about you, T?
Let's see. I think I named my first guy AAA. My second guy was BBB.
Oh, yeah.
I think I did the S. I don't remember what I named my people in the SNES version. I think I did something normal, but when I booted up the remake, I was like, I don't have time to click through this keyboard because I was playing it on the Steam Deck. So I'm like, I'm not going to click through this clunky keyboard. I'm just going to go AAA. So really
very practical, T.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're here to do one job.
I did family names for mine. So Clark was in my party. Clark was my warrior.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
I did my wife and kids. Very straightforward.
So, who is the Beastmaster for both of you guys?
For me, the Beastmaster was Jeremy.
Nice.
So for me, I was streaming to my friend Tim when I was creating my party. So I let him choose what class he wanted to be. So actually, the reason why I had the Beastmaster is because I put Tim in my party, and he wanted to be the Beastmaster.
Oh, so, beautiful.
Yeah.
What about dual classing? Did any of you explore dual classing at all?
I did.
What did you think about the dual classing system?
I only did it with one of my characters because after talking to you, I was getting close to the end of the game, and I didn't want to start all over. But what I did was I took my healer and made it a mage also. So, and then I didn't realize this, but if you have a certain book, you can make them a sage. I think I'm probably did that wrong then. But anyways, I made him a mage.
I don't think you did it wrong. And actually, this is a good point to just talk about this. That's what's kind of great about this game is there's really no right or wrong way. The Sage is a good class. In the older versions, the Sage is actually kind of OP. In this new one, the Sage is not really OP. It's like right along the same power level as the Cleric and the Wizard, in my opinion. So they kind of balanced it out a little bit. So there is a special book. I forget what they call it in this new one. But yeah, you find it in that tower that's just north of All Trades Abbey. At the top of that, you get the book. They actually add, there was only the one in the original one. In this one, they add a second one in the second act of the game, so you could actually convert two people. But you can always have access to Sage 2 without the book, because if you get Gadabout up to level 20, you can upgrade them to a Sage. I guess maybe we should explain a little bit here too, maybe back up, just for those listening to the podcast, you might not be familiar with kind of how dual classing works. Is obviously you start off with your class that you choose. At level 20 and beyond, you have the option of switching classes. When you switch classes, you start back on level 1, and you lose half of your stats. Basically half your stats. If you had used seeds on them, you don't lose half of the stats from the seeds, but you lose half of your stats and start at level 1. And it might seem like, well, why would I want to downgrade him? Well, you actually level up super fast at that point, because you're in a group that will help power level you kind of back up really quick to where you're at, and you're going to be stronger than you were when you kind of catch back up to the rest of the party, because you grow levels like normally, but now you're just but you started with more base stats from half the stats being gone, but you kept more than you would normally have at level 1.
And this is pretty standard fare in JRPGs, at least at this time, right? Because I remember this was in Shining Force.
Well, I mean, it was kind of in Shining Force. This was basically the first JRPG to have a dual class system. Like there were other like Final Fantasy. The original Final Fantasy came out before um, Dragon Quest 3, and even Dragon Quest 2 kind of had class systems. Um, but this is the first one that you had all the freedom and you had the ability to switch classes. And when you switch classes, and I didn't mention this, you get to keep all of your abilities and spells.
Yeah.
So what I really liked about this as a kid is it like made it so you like each party was like your party. Like every person in your party's gone through their own path, and you've controlled that path completely. You guys have any other thoughts on the class system?
I really enjoyed it. Like Trevor said, it's been done before, but it's cool to see playing through this the remake how they would approach it nowadays. I found myself wanting to push like my character higher and higher, so the benefits bigger and bigger, but then at the same time I'm also getting impatient because I want to try to beat the game. And so I think it's a balancing act there. Like if you want to, my goal was like try to get to level 40 before I reclassed. And Clark was like, he told me as long as you get like the spells and stuff that you want, then it's probably just okay. So I just thought it was cool. It's another one of those carrot on a stick things, and one of those dopamine hits as you're trying to go through and do things and change things. It's one of those things to do, and I thought it was pretty well done, and it definitely got its claws on me too. And I didn't do it with my other two characters, but I'm going to. This game has got me wanting more, and I want to go back and make sure I do all that I can with this, and that'll be one of the other things too, is finish dual classing all my characters.
And you could triple class, you could quadruple class if you wanted to put enough time into it. So
have you ever done that?
I have.
Oh my goodness!
The Game Boy Color version, I really dug deep into that. Now the Game Boy Color version was the first one to add a lot of like post game content, and this is like really challenging post game content. And that I was playing that like in 2003, I think, and I remember just like being blown away with how difficult the post game content was. And there's a lot of post game content in this one too. Just to kind of wrap up this discussion around here, what I remember really loving about this game as a kid, and it still carries through today, is I think there's some systems in games that really get their hooks in me. For like Magic the Gathering, one of my favorite games, like one of the things I really liked about Magic the Gathering is like every deck you built was your deck. Like you like put your time and your effort and the strategies to like pull this deck together, and now you get to see how that deck performs. I really like that. The roguelike games that I like to play right now, it's kind of the same sort of feeling. Like you're crafting and you're going down the paths that you want to, and you're coming up with this thing that's uniquely yours. This was really one of the first games that gave me that feeling more than anything. So
yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned like the roguelike. Probably you're mentioning some of the like the deck building roguelikes, where a lot of those times like you're dealing with like, you know, single percentage point like advantages by adding or subtracting a card to your deck. And that's, I think, a great way to describe this game. And it's something that I wasn't ready for. My initial reaction to this game was that everything in this game was tedious. I was like, everything in this game is just like, is like micromanaging and like very unrewarding in like the short term. And I've since come to appreciate that there's a lot of that kind of single percentage point like adjustments going on that makes it so that you have a lot of granular customization available to you and kind of how the game plays. And that's something that I came to appreciate more as the game went on. So I think that's a pretty apt comparison that you just made, like for people that love to get into and tinker, this game has a lot to let you tinker with.
Yeah. One of the aspects that around the gameplay, I know there's just so much to sink your teeth in this game, which is, just I keep kind of coming back to this, but it's amazing that a lot of the structure was built in 1988 of all years. I can't overstate that enough, but this game, actually even the original, was some of the earliest, I think the earliest, especially the original, was like the first example of an open world game that I had where it like opened the world up and you could just kind of do what you want. Now there's aspects of that here as well. And I wanted to ask you guys, like, this being an example of there are linear things to this game, but there's also a lot of open world aspects of this game too. Did you guys appreciate those parts in this game?
So, I've been pretty busy this month that we were leading up to this podcast. So I was aware that things were open world, but I was kind of just focused on trying to get through the game. So when I have a little bit more time, I'm hoping to get into exploring the map a little bit more and finding all the little hidden secrets and all that stuff. But for me, I didn't get a chance to do it that much this play around, but yeah. I'll get to it. So I don't know.
Yeah, I was really impressed at the scale of the map. I actually thought that the entire game was going to be on that little island that you start on in the beginning, and I thought that it was enough. I didn't have any complaints when I kind of got a sense of that scale. And then you leave it, and there's just an entire world out there, and it's huge. There's a lot to do. I think my complaint is that I felt like a lot of those extras never really felt very important. It didn't really feel like I was getting very tangibly rewarded as far as like my story gameplay. But maybe it's because I haven't got to the point where it pays off in the story later on.
Yeah. Talking about the open world, did you guys notice anything familiar about the open world?
It looks a lot like our open world.
Yes, it's
IRL.
Yeah, did you notice that, Trev? That it's a world map essentially.
I am a little embarrassed to admit that I actually didn't until you pointed it out a little while ago to me. I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, it's right there. It's kind of freaky that I didn't notice that.
Yeah.
Well, you got places called like Romeria and Japang.
Yeah. And Portoga.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
it probably says a lot about me that I didn't notice that.
Well, I didn't notice that. I mean, at some point I realized it as a kid, but I probably played it for a year or two before I even realized that, hey, like, this is the world map. Like, you pull up a map and it looks like, hey, there's North America, there's South America, there's Africa, there's Europe, there's Russia. And it's pretty cool in the localization of this game. I don't know if you got to the parts, but like you get to some of the areas where they're Russian and they have Russian accents, and you get to some of the place where they would have Spanish accents. They have Spanish accents. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. That was really cool.
Let's talk a little bit about the story in this game. And to kick things off, Trevor, on a scale of 9 to 10, how life-changing was the narrative in this game for you?
That was about 4 stars.
Okay.
Out of 4.5 stars. So, yeah, I never really bought into the story too much. It starts out kind of, okay. And this is where I'm coming from, right? I'm coming from I'm a retrospective here. Like I have only my experience to base this game off of. At the time, probably it was more interesting than that, but you wake up, it's your 16th birthday, you got to go save the world, and like that's kind of really
that's really like it for the story. Yeah. Like there's some meat around this and they fleshed it out a lot in the remake too. You're kind of following in the footsteps of your father, which
Right.
is unique in it wasn't very told very well, I don't think, in the NES version, but in the new version with the voice acting, I think it and some they added some scenes with your Ortega as your father. You get to see some of his companions that you didn't get to see, and some other. Um, I think really fleshes it out and makes it a little bit more grounded that way. But in the end, this is just go fight the big evil sort of story.
Yeah, with mini quests along the way.
One thing I would like to point out, though, is it doesn't seem like a lot of these RPGs, it doesn't seem like a lot of those because it's not like impending doom. You can't see like a comet in the sky. There's you're not harvesting all the Earth's resources and using up all your Gaia and stuff like that. It's kind of like, hey, you know what? There is a kind of a bad guy around here, and your dad was searching for him at one point and never came back. So if you want to follow in your dad's footsteps and maybe take him out before these wars start, maybe you could do that.
Yeah,
because as you're going around the world, no one seems like they're like all worried about the impending doom or anything.
And one of the
like
things that this game does well, I think, is you get like kind of clues to that the big bad or whatever is getting stronger. You come to not one but two locations on the map that have been infiltrated by Baramos's minions, right? And they have replaced basically the ruler of those kingdoms with their own minions, and they basically have control of those kingdoms. So, yes, you don't really know the extent of the threat until you start getting into the game and you realize that, like, hey, and that's another thing that I want to talk about is the vignettes. And Dragon Quest is kind of now famous for the little vignettes, and I think a lot of times this is actually more affecting than an overall narrative. Like what drives the story more forward for me is just like, hey, you come to a town, there's a problem, you figure out how to solve that problem, and then you kind of move on. But each one is sort of unique, and that's kind of where I wanted to start this conversation here, Cam. Of these vignettes that you played through, which ones did you like the most?
Well, my favorite was the one keeping an eye on Bobsville was my favorite. if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Trevor, you probably don't know what I mean, but Bobsville. So there's a town. You go into this area, and he's like, there's a dude just sitting there, and it's just one dude, and he's like, I want to create this town, but I don't have a merchant here to help start this town. So basically, what you're supposed to do is you go back to where you've the bar where you recruit your team members, and you just create a merchant and put him in your party, and then go back to that place and you drop your little merchant off there. And then he's like, great, thanks for giving me a merchant. And it makes you kind of feel like sad that you're leaving your merchant behind, but I had just created that character, so I didn't care anyway. Anyway, so you just drop your merchant off there, and then you just check back every once in a while, and the town gets a little bit bigger as you go progress throughout the game, and you find out kind of what's going on in that town, and you eventually find out that the merchant that you had left there becomes super power hungry and makes himself the king of that area. And then the people get all pissed at him and depose him and throw him in jail.
It's so cool.
That was my favorite.
Yeah, that was always my favorite too. And like, this is an example of something like interesting and trailblazing that this game did. Like that happened in an NES game. And
I know it's pretty amazing
Yeah.
that they would think to do something like that on 1988 technology. I loved how they did it in this remake. I wish I could have experienced it on the NES, but yeah, it was fun checking back and checking it, watching the story grow little by little, because you're off doing other things while this is going on in the background. It's pretty cool.
yeah, it's like a little frontier town, like a little pioneer town that starts up. And yeah, it's really cool. T,
How did that compare to the NES one, Clark? Did you I'm sure you played that part in the NES and in
Absolutely,
this version?
multiple times. Yeah, it's a little bit more fleshed out, but actually, the NES version had basically the same progression. Like, it worked out the same way. Um, there, I mean, there obviously was more voice acting and a few more things to the town, but it was pretty much the same thing.
And that's kind of the feeling that I keep getting about this game is that it was really when I went back to play the NES version that I finally started to feel like I appreciated like what was going on throughout all of these versions, but yeah, especially the remake. That the formula really hasn't changed too much by this game, for better or for worse, depending on your viewpoint. But they struck something there that has persisted now. What is this? This is 30 years,
36,
30 plus years
36, 36 years.
and
So, yeah.
and the fact that the formula like isn't completely archaic is a testament. Whether or not it really stands up, you could debate, but it's the fact that it's not completely outdated is really impressive.
Yeah. Did you have any of the vignettes that stood out to you, T, as you were playing?
Nothing crazy, nothing like that. Now I want to go and try that one.
Yeah. Some of these are pretty serious. I remember even as like a 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid playing through the vignette where it was the town. You go to the town of Nonalese or Nonalese. It's basically north of Russia. And you get to a town that is just completely asleep. Everyone there is just snoring away. And
Yeah.
this is like one of the more affecting ones because like you dig into what's happened there and you find out that, someone from that town fell in love with someone from the elven town. And the queen of the elven town didn't bless that, and that was not okay with her. And basically, it was a Romeo and Juliet tale, and they commit suicide. And they talk about this in an 8-bit NES game about how they kill themselves. And like I remember being like thinking it was pretty heavy when I was a kid, and it still is kind of heavy for a game like this. And so you have to solve this and figure out everything and kind of restore things to somewhat semblance of order before you can kind of move on. And yeah, it's just an example of one of those things like this game can be a little bit more mature than you think a silly Akira Toriyama designed with a art game would be.
Yeah, I love all the vignettes. They're all interesting. I mean, a couple of them are kind of similar. Like you already mentioned the kings or queens that have been taken over by the big bads and stuff like that. That's happens to a couple of them, but for the most part, they're all pretty unique, and they keep you. If you're engaged in story, it's a pretty good way to tell a story, I think.
Yeah, even though like it did some stuff that I thought was really unique, like when basically you return the queen's crown after beating Robin Hood, and he's like, "Okay, you're now king," and like it changes your sprite to the king sprite, and you're walking around the town as king. Like,
Yeah,
that was pretty unique.
I remember when that happened to me, and I was like, "Oh, I was the queen." I'm like, "Is there something I can unlock or do while I'm the I was a queen, by the way, so so
You are.
yes.
No, and there's really nothing you can do. Like, you can go around, live it up as a king, and then realize it's really boring, and then you stop, put an end to it. But
Yeah, you find out that the king just wanted to go gamble.
yeah,
On the he just wanted to spend and gamble.
yeah.
It's a lesson for life right there.
And you mentioned it earlier, but like the little vignette. Well, it's not even really a vignette, but like you come to a town where everyone's dead, and it was unique because at night they're alive, and it's actually one of those ones where you're just kind of, it's pretty close to where Baramos' castle is, and so you're just kind of left to sort of build this narrative in your head about what's going on with that town. So I think those vignettes are like pretty strong, and I will say that the remake does a better job. It did a better job pulling me into the larger narrative than I was used to. One example I really wanted to call out is the voice acting is really strong. And they give a lot more lines to your mom in this game. Like, your mom is so much of a side character, which I remember as a kid thinking it was kind of odd. But your mom is a lot more present, and the voice actor for the mom does a really good job in this. And so there's a little bit better connection there in this game.
Yeah,
you just go have sleepovers at mom's house.
Yeah. You don't have to pay for the inn. Go sleep at mom's house.
That's that life hack right there.
Yeah.
It's like that in real life too. I have a complaint kind of in general about JRPGs where, and we already touched on, where like the narrative is kind of lost in everything else that you do. And I do sometimes feel like that's like a hallmark of JRPGs, is that there's so much filler content that you could spend tens of hours doing that you totally don't even get, you don't get to dive into the narrative or don't want to dive into the narrative. And I've seen that a few times now, just again with JRPGs, that the narrative gets watered down with all of this extra content. Yeah. And some people, I suppose, would probably call that a good thing. And maybe that's just another mark for this game, just kind of being kind of a complex game. Like, it doesn't really fit into one box. It does a lot of things, and whether or not you think that does those things really well, I guess, is kind of dependent on the player.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people like that. I mean, as they like that the narrative isn't quite as fleshed out like that, because I think the Dragon Quest games, I think the reason why people love them so much is you can put yourself in as the hero, and you're substituting you in here, and you get to kind of ascribe your life experiences and things going on to things in the game, so it's not quite as deep. It's more surface level stuff, that you can...
It's way more of a traditional role play. Like, this is... Like,
yes.
You're playing this role, and the narrative, that's you, and you are a silent protagonist for a reason. The hero never speaks in this game because you are the one that is supposed to be speaking at those times.
And then, like a series like Final Fantasy,
they diverged. Final Fantasy is very like, this is a unique
very
character.
Story.
Yeah.
But this isn't you. This is a unique character, and you're getting involved in this character's life. Yeah. Whereas Dragon Quest, this is you.
Do you have a preference, T? Like, do you like the mute hero that's sort of an avatar, or do you like the more fleshed out stories in your role playing games?
I like the idea of the mute hero where you're putting yourself in, but I personally, and maybe it's just the way that I view these games, I've always kind of felt like it's a little bit lazy when it comes to storytelling, and I never feel like that mute hero thing really makes me feel that much more involved than it would have had the hero been talking, had they had their own personality. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I feel like it's a cop out, and certainly like most of my experience with this game, the more I played, the more I appreciated what was going on here, and that it wasn't just a cop out. But there was also kind of this aspect that I felt like I felt a little vanilla about the hero and the party. Like, I didn't feel like I was connecting with the party a lot. The world around me was kind of cool, but the people that I was controlling, from minute to minute, I wasn't very invested in.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's maybe one of the reasons why people like naming their characters after their friends or family and stuff too, like that. Because I remember telling, when Clark was watching me play, I'm like, I got to get Trina this, and I got to go get Clark. You need to get you a new sword or whatever. It's more personalized, but yeah, I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, and Trevor really got attached to AAA.
Yeah. Well, when you have a party like AAA, BBB, like it's a one of a kind experience right there. These are people you're gonna get invested in, and maybe that's just it. Maybe like I wasn't going in with the right frame of mind, and yeah, just like I've said a number of times now with this game, like whether that's a positive thing or a negative thing, the game even requires you to go in with the right frame of mind. I guess you could say, you can make an argument either way, whether that's good or bad. I personally, like I said, I didn't feel personally invested in my characters. Yeah. The other characters were interesting, but my characters I never cared about.
So let's dive into the really spoilery aspect of the story here. And I guess we could put a spoiler warning, but if you've gotten this far, you've learned a lot about it, so you understand. But this game really blew young 10-year-old Clark's mind. So at this point, I had played through Dragon Warrior 1 a lot. And then to play through probably 40, 50 hours of this game, and then find out that it's a surprise prequel to the first game was mind-blowing at the time. And it was really unique, too. There weren't really anything that had ever done that before. It's like there's no connections to the original game until like right at the end. Well, I guess probably about 2/3 of the way through, and then you're like, wow, this is actually a sequel or a prequel to the first game. And which I thought was crazy. So anyway, Cam, I don't know if you probably had that spoiled to you long ago, but like, what do you feel about that twist?
Oh, I think it's awesome. So, coming up into this game, actually, I had played through most of Dragon Warrior 2.
Mm-hmm.
And Dragon Warrior 2 kind of has the same thing also, in that you play through the game and then eventually you come back to the same area.
But it's a sequel at that time, yeah.
Yeah, but this is a sequel. And you come back to it, and I remember thinking, oh, this is cool, because I had just played through Dragon Warrior 1. I'm like, this is like the places I've been when I've been in Dragon Warrior. But the way they do it here, it's you're not expecting it at all. And the way they tie it in, where your character in this game is the legendary character that is talked about in the first game, it's pretty awesome. And I thought it's pretty cool.
Yeah, like I said, it blew my mind. And Trevor, I don't think you got to that part, and so it probably wouldn't have had an effect on you at all. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I knew what was going to happen. I read the plot for it, but yeah, having not played the other games, I don't know how hard it would have hit. I think it is really cool, like the way that they tie that in. I think that that's very impressive. And again, I mean, in '88, like there's next level storytelling going on in this video game, which is really, really cool.
Now, this is a trope that would kind of get copied by a lot of other role-playing games, and it was sort of pioneered here, where there's like a dark world. And if you've played Final Fantasy VI, you know, a lot of times like you go through a main world, and then there's like a big change, and then there's like an alternate dark world. And that was pioneered here in this game. And it just so happened that that dark world is the world that you eventually end up saving again in Dragon Quest 1. And Cam.
Well, I was just going to say, after all the many hours I played wandering around Dragon Quest 1's map, like, it just, with that song burned into my mind, seared in there. Do, 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 do. Anyways, when you hear that music again, it's like, oh, I'm back.
Yeah. And really, like, for someone like me, like, and you, like, you're talking about, like, Dragon Quest 1 is such, like, a compact game, and there's so many unique, like, scenarios and people there that you visit a lot in such a small, compact area that, like, and you traverse it so well, like, you begin to know it like the back of your hand. So, like, when you visit that world in Dragon Quest 3, it's actually pretty amazing for someone to go through that experience, because then you, like, know everything about the world, and, like, you can directly compare to how things are different in this one versus Dragon Quest 1, which, you know, it's an experience that, like, if you want to have that experience, I guess you can. It won't be a surprise, but you could go play Dragon Warrior 1 and then come play this and have that same experience. But
that's pretty cool.
Yeah, because
did they explain it all, like you knowing the Dark World now as like that hero? Is there like some sort of plot device that they use to be like, oh, this is why you know your way around this world, or is it just you just know it?
So the way you know your way around the world in this game, or in Dragon Quest 1?
In 3, like, is there a reason like your hero is supposed to know like the back of their hand in Dragon Quest 3?
I was just mostly talking about that, like, you actually don't know like the back of your hand. I was actually mostly talking about like the player themselves. They know that world like the back of their hand because they've played through Dragon Quest One.
Right, yeah. I was wondering if there was some sort of plot device to, kind of going with this, like the player is the character theme, that like maybe there was like, I don't know, the main character had been dreaming about it for years or something, and that's why like you can land there and know. But
Yeah.
you just show up and like you know what's going on.
Yeah, the player knows what's going on because they've already played Dragon Quest One.
Right,
But
yeah.
you as the player, you're like, or the hero in this game is it's all new, but it's kind of a revelation at the time because like this is why you're following in the tracks of your father, and this is why if he felt lost is because he ended up here in this world, which is kind of lost to the upper world. Um, and people up in the upper world didn't really know about this world, and that's why Ortega was sort of lost, is because he was trapped in this world. And so you go and you uncover all the clues, and there's just so many Easter eggs. It's like that Leonardo DiCaprio where he's got like a beer in his hand and he's pointing at the TV. It's like that, like every 5 minutes, like, oh, I know that. Yeah, I know that. It's like just a million Easter eggs.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah.
It's
Now, there is a bonus Easter egg. I don't think either of you have beat this game that ties that it's sort of setting things up to expand Dragon Quest 1 and Dragon Quest 2. And I can explain that here to you guys now if you want, or do you want to wait?
no, just go explain it to us.
So in this game, there's a dragon, and that dragon queen is what it is dying, but it's leaving behind an egg. And this dragon queen is what gives you the stones, the sunstones. That sunstone is what you actually use in Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest 1 and in this game. But before it dies, it leaves an egg, and there's these priests that watch over this egg. And in the original game, they don't really flesh any of that out anymore. But in this game, the very last thing is the priest, one of the priests comes up and is talking to the egg, and it basically assures the egg that it's going to be safe and that it's going to protect it with its life. And you learn that the priest's name is Hargon, which, if you've played Dragon Quest II, the antagonist in that game for most of the game is called Hargon, and you fight the priests of Hargon. He's sort of like a cult leader in that game. So what this is sort of kind of setting up, and I think is actually a pretty cool reveal, is that this egg that's going to be hatching is going to be the Dragon Lord in Dragon Warrior 1. And Hargon is going to corrupt this dragon that's hatching to be the antagonist in Dragon Quest 1. And then eventually, he's going to be the big bad in Dragon Quest 2.
Tying it all together.
Yep. So that's one thing that we haven't talked about because it's not the focus of this game or our discussion here, but they did announce 3 or 4 months ago that they were remaking Dragon Quest 1 and 2 as one game that is going to be in this style as well. So
That's cool.
I'll be excited about that because I had a real hard time playing through Dragon Quest 2. Dragon Quest 2 was a hard game to get through.
Yeah.
Or Dragon Warrior 2.
Yeah, it's a difficult game. The remakes of Dragon Quest 2 are a little bit more forgiving. And I know you were playing the NES version, which I like the NES version, but it's tough as nails. The remakes are a little bit easier. All right, I think we've covered a lot of ground here around story, gameplay. There's obviously things that we didn't hit. Are there things that you guys want to hit around this? T, we'll start with you. Or is there anything itching that you want to get off your chest here before we start talking about music?
No. Yeah, this is a game that rewards a lot of time, and yeah, I think that's a very unique style of game, and it's really kind of up to the player whether or not they have that to give.
Yeah. All right, let's jump into music because, man, at least for me, like the music is a big reason to play through Dragon Quest. It's got a lot of traditional and famous music, a lot of music that they've carried on through the rest of the games. And so maybe before we dive into individual tracks, let's talk about how you felt about the soundtrack as you were playing through it. And I think most of us are going to be coming through the perspective of the HD remake. T, what was your thoughts around the music in this game?
The music is cool. In the remake, the music is really cool. It doesn't get old, although you do hear the kind of the battle song a lot, but it's still really good. The orchestration is well done, sounds quality, and it really fits with the vibe of the game.
Yeah. Cam, what about you?
Yeah, I really enjoy the full orchestration of the tunes here and the range of them too. They're very emotional, and like some of the ones that I chose here to play, you'll see why I chose them. I kind of like the ones that are somber and yeah. Anyways, I really enjoyed the orchestrations on them. They're great.
Yeah. My thoughts are like the same as yours. Like it was really, really kind of special to hear the symphonic versions of these in this game. Like it was, I've heard symphonic versions in other contexts here, but for some reason when these ones they record, you can tell they just put a lot of care into it, and it translates really well to a symphony orchestra, I think, because the actual composer of this is like a real like classical kind of composer. He's like a serious composer that they brought on, and you can tell like some of these tracks can be complicated and a little bit different than sometimes you see in some games. You get like some classical type pieces, so you get like a rondo, I think, is what one of the ones that I'm sharing is an actual like real rondo music, and it's pretty cool. All right, well, let's go through some of the tracks that we want to share. Cam, let's maybe start with yours. Which song do you want to start with, Cam?
Small Shrine.
Stands out to you about this track, Cam?
Well, I mean, it's a theme that's played into other tracks and stuff like that, but it's got a more somber tone to it. Just listen to the music. It makes me think of the 2D, 3D style that you get when you're walking through some of these shrines, and you get these big statues and stuff that kind of line things, and the lighting that comes in, it just is a whole ambiance on it. And so when I hear this music, it makes me think of those shrines that you go to.
Yeah, that's a huge upgrade in this game, man. Like the way this game is presented in the remake is incredible, and I think that you're right. The graphics and the presentation really like go well with this music.
Yeah, the music fits perfectly with what's going on in the game, in the area that you are at.
It's funny that you picked this one because I remember like this music meant solace when you heard it in the NES version. Like you knew that you were kind of in a safe space a little bit. Like you didn't be attacked by monsters. There's some times where like you would go through like a huge dungeon, come out the other side, and there's a shrine there, and you like kind of take a breather. Like, yeah, whew. Yeah. I love it too. All right, did you have another that you wanted to share?
In Slumber. It's the music that plays, but when you're in those dream states and you're getting instruction from
Rubus
on high. And in this 2D version, it's narrated in the voice. So it's an echoey, mysterious voice, and your character is sitting down there in like a puddle of water, and basically the voice is telling you, "Good job for finding this orb. Good job."
It's the same voice that basically gives you a personality quiz at the beginning. It makes fun of you and calls you a conceited idiot.
Yeah.
I like it too. This is actually unique to the later games. The whole personality thing wasn't in the original game.
Oh, yeah, it wasn't. I didn't think about that.
Good stuff. All right, T. You had some tracks that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, let's just skip to Overture. I liked Tower, but I just want to talk about Overture because I accidentally hit on something that was apparently important to this series that I didn't realize. Yeah, so I booted up the SNES version first, and it's got whatever SNES version, and then I booted up the remake, and I was like, yeah, okay, so they're just doing their thing here. But it wasn't until I booted up the NES that I really realized that they really kept this, like the spirit of this game, consistent across time and space here, and I thought that was really cool. And it turns out, what you guys just said, that this is present in all
every single Dragon Quest
games.
Yep, even like the side story ones. Yeah.
I didn't know that. I just kind of tuned into this track as like I already felt like it was anchoring me into these games across the NES, SNES, and then the remake versions. And I think that's really cool. And yeah, once again, it just kind of speaks to the grand scale and the ambition that this game has going for it.
And to me, this game, like this music, when you hear this, it means like, oh, you're starting an adventure. Like that's just 36 years ingrained in me. Like you hear this song, you're starting an adventure, you kind of know what you're expecting. It's like the perfect tone setter.
Yeah, it's.
Let's do boot up Tower 2. Tower here. Here we go.
It's a little bit different than your normal dungeon musics.
Yeah, it stood out to me. I really enjoyed listening to it as I was getting through this part of the game.
It's kind of mysterious, huh?
Yeah, this is the first time that I really did tune into the soundtrack and really appreciate that they were going for something, which then inspired me to just kind of pay more attention to the other songs as well. And I think this is a perfect fit. It's unique. It's obviously well executed, and so this is my favorite pick.
All right, let me share a couple of my favorites. I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of like real classical style music in this game, like stuff that you would hear from 300-400 years ago or whatever. And let's start with this version here, which is the NES version. So you can see it's playing with the NES sound trip. It's a little bit harsh, but you can tell that like the yes,
Trevor's going hard.
head banging. But you can tell like the complexity is there, even in this rudimentary sound. So let's switch to the remake version. The remake is really cool too. Let's see. A little more palatable. So this is generally what you're hearing when you're walking around like the castle. It sounds royal. It sounds like you're a little bit higher class, right? Complex. I think it does a great job.
Sounds like you're looking looking down on all your subjects as you tax them and all the wealth you sap them until they die to fund your castle.
All right, so the next one, maybe I'll call a little bit of an audible here. So, Trevor, do you remember when we did the first Diet episode and we were going through NES music? And we pulled up the overworld theme for the first Dragon Warrior.
Yeah.
I'm gonna pull it up here.
It was so simple, but when they did it in the remake, they upgraded it and made it a little bit more complex. And I think we kind of chuckled a little bit about how simple it was and how it was just like a 15-second loop, and how grating that would be. But I think it gets a really good upgrade here. So the kind of cool thing about this is when you get to the Dark World, this is pretty much the first thing you hear, is you hear this song. And if you had played Dragon Quest 1, there was no doubt where this music came from, because this was burned into your skull. And so at this point, when you dropping into the land of darkness and playing this music, you got like kind of alarm bells going on, like what's going on here, before you even really see too much of what's going on. So that's cool.
It's a good version of it. Much easier on the ears.
Yeah. And just one more quick shout out to the end theme. We won't play the whole thing, but it's called Into the Story. So this is what plays over the credits. It's pretty stirring. This is what you would be looking for in an end theme. And it's really varied too, and this is in the original version too. So I mean, it sounds quite a bit more basic, but the complexity is still there in the original too. And I just thought it was a fitting way to end what felt like a really epic quest, is to hear this theme play out. And when you get to this point in the game, it's got these little, like, basically mini screenshots of all the different places and people that you've met along the way, and kind of like what they're doing now, sort of thing. So overall, our impression's pretty positive here on the soundtrack, it sounds like.
Especially the remake. Yeah.
Yeah, the remake's music is awesome. Yes.
Yeah.
All right, is it judgment time now?
It is judgment time. Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived. And I think this is going to be an interesting one to kind of put a score on, at least, especially for me. I've been pretty conflicted as I've been thinking about my thoughts here. So, Cam, let's start with you. Actually, before you start, let's just give a real quick rundown of how we score things here. We essentially do a tier rank. What you would think of S, A, B, C, D kind of tier of games. We do assign a score, so when we talk about it, we're going to assign it a score. S would be 6, all the way down to F would be a 1. And then we average our score and kind of give that our seal, so we can kind of know how this game will fit into all the other games that we've discussed. Real quick of what each number will mean as we talk about it. If we give something a 6, that's a game that we think was not only one of the best games then, if it was released today, it would be one of the best games now. So not too many games are going to qualify for that. In fact, I would be shocked if we had too many that would qualify in the games that we talk about there. 5 would be a game that nostalgia does help carry it today, but it's still an all-time great, and fun to play if it does fall short of modern games. 4 would be a game that is still fun to play, but it wouldn't separate itself from the pack today. Like the average game that comes out would just be as good or better than that game. 3 would be fun to play for 10 minutes, then you'd kind of move on. 2 would be nostalgia alone is not enough to get you to turn this game on. And 1 would be not only is it not good today, it wasn't good back then. So, Cam, let's start with you. Let's hear your thoughts about how you're going to score this game.
Okay, my score I'm going to give it today is based off of the remake. And if I was going to score this compared to the NES version, they would be different scores. But because I played the remake version, I'm going to say this is a solid 5. It's an awesome game. They've updated it to make more approachable for the current gamer. There's a lot of nostalgia for us older people, and I just think there's a lot of stuff to mine in this game, and it's a lot of fun to be had if this is your kind of game. Whereas if this was the Nintendo game, I'd probably give it like a 3.5 or something like that.
Yeah.
Because it's just much harder to get through. But I'm going to say 5.
Okay. T, I think we're going to hold off and let you go last because I think your insights here are going to be really valuable because there's just way too much nostalgia going on from my end and a little bit from Cam's end too. So I'll follow Cam here. I am also going to say 5, and I'm not going to lie. Like there's a lot of nostalgia speaking to that, and that is for the HD 2D version. I would not recommend that most people go back and play the NES version unless they really want to kind of get a feel for how where the game started and where the origins of the JRPG genre started. I think it's good to go check out the original maybe for those purposes. But if you're going to sit down and play the whole game all the way through, you should play the remake. Let me add a caveat to that too, though. Cameron, you mentioned like I think you do need to know that JRPGs are sort of your thing before you get into it. That's sort of the caveat here. If you're not into Japanese role-playing games, then just disregard what I'm saying here. But if you are into Japanese role-playing games, you really kind of owe it to yourself to play this game. Not just for the history, but there's a lot of things in here that are timeless and hold up. And it may have a little bit higher barrier of entry to some modern games. But it still stands up. And the remake is very faithful. It's got a lot of the warts in there, but I think it outshines those warts a lot. And man, there's so much meat in here to sink your teeth into. Like, I've beat the game, I beat the remake, but they have expanded things out, and I could probably put another 100 hours into the game at this point, and I'm itching to get back to it, and I love it. So, my thoughts, 5. All right, let's go to our unbiased panelist here. What are your thoughts, T?
Yeah, if you're not a JRPG fan, it's like a 1. No. So my score is gonna speak to this game again. I'm gonna base it on the SNES version, excuse me, because I really think the NES version is borderline unplayable, but the SNES version is like a serious contender for like a retro game that you could get into. But here we are, scoring different versions of this game. It's still around after 30 years. We poured over the soundtrack. We all, agree across the board. Like the soundtrack is awesome. The overall narrative is epic, right? Like the updated graphics are really cool. But the SNES version, I'm gonna give a 3, and it's because it's just not. It's not going to be a standout candidate anymore if you go back to that. It's fun to play, and like Clark said, and we've talked about throughout this episode, there's a pedigree here of these JRPGs, which led into a lot of really famous games, the Pokemons, right? But the game itself is difficult to break into. It demands a lot of its players, and it can lack some of those rewards. Again, speaking for the SNES version in particular, I kind of thought it would be like recommending somebody to get into Metal Gear Solid if Metal Gear Solid was a turn-based menu, combat system. Like, it's really rewarding if you've been with it for 30 years. If you haven't been with it for 30 years, you're going to jump into this fan base, you're going to jump into the game, and it's going to be a fever dream.
We're going to have to do Metal Gear Solid here one of these days for you, T.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that wraps up our discussion on Dragon Quest III. So I want to just really thank you, Cam and Trevor, for joining me on this quest. I realized that, especially Trevor, that asking you to play almost 40-hour JRPG for a podcast is a big ask. So I really appreciate you coming along this, especially at this busy time of year with the holidays, and humoring me on my nostalgia. So thank you for that.
I have a question. So did you get your handle from this game, Edric?
Yeah. So let's
came from this game.
Let's talk about that. So yes, I did. It was an early name that I used, was Edric, and the actual name is Erdrick. I don't know if you saw that. There's an R in there. But when I played it as a kid, I always just called it Edric. And I don't know if it was because of my bad reading comprehension, but I just always, or if I just thought Edric sounded better. To me, Edric was always better than Erdrick. So I just, when it came time to have kind of an online handle or whatever, I just said, hey, I'll just be Edric. So I was Edric. Yes, it did came from the original Dragon Warrior.
Oh man, full circle right now.
Yep.
Goosebumps.
Yep. The main character of this game is Clark.
Good stuff. Well, not just you guys, but anyone who listens to this, thanks for coming on this quest with us. Really appreciate the time, and TwinCast is out.
How was everyone's Puff Puff break? Trevor probably doesn't know what Puff Puff is.
Yeah.
I'm imagining what it is. I'm probably not thinking of the right thing.
T, we were actually wondering if you could take your shirt off and give the viewers a puff puff.
No, this is a family show. After the King's Quest episode, we've gone all family.